Shalom, welcome to my channel, The Hebrew Bible. This is Moses Gumadi, and in this video we'll talk about the significance of the dual name or the compound name Adonai Elohim, or the tetragrammaton YHWH followed by Elohim. This compound name or the dual name, which of course consists of two parts. The first one is Hashem, YHWH, Adonai, which occurs 6,828 times in the Hebrew Tanach. And the next name is Elohim, which means God, and this occurs 2,600 times in the Hebrew Tanach. Now, interestingly, I'll mention gematria, though it is not Hebrew grammar. So, okay, just take it with a pinch of salt. We teach Hebrew grammar here, but occasionally I do mention these things as well. Here we have 2,600 times, and so the number 26 is of course the gematria value of Hashem YHWH. So Elohim occurs 2,600 times. 26 happens to be Hashem's number. But then YHWH occurs 6,828 times, and the first two digits are 68. When reversed is 86, happens to be the gematria value of Elohim. So there's a bit of an exchange there. So you might say, what about 28 in the 6,828? Well, I don't know. This is not math. I mean, these are not strict rules. I'm just trying to show you some observation. Okay? Right. So that's those are the two names, Hashem and Elohim. But the interesting thing that we all of course know is that Hashem is not introduced in chapter 1. Hashem is introduced later in the Tanach. So the name that appears in the book of Genesis in the first verse is Elohim. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. And then we will read about Elohim doing this and that throughout this chapter. In fact, in the whole of the creation section, chapter 1, verse 1 to verse 31, we find the name of Elohim mentioned 32 times, followed by 3 times in the next section, the first 3 verses, where Shabbat is introduced. We see the name of Elohim alone. We're only talking about the name of Elohim by itself in these two sections, mentioned 32 plus 3 times, during the creation 32 times. This is, of course, the first 32 is referred to in a book known as Sefer Yetzirah, the book of formation, or sometimes said to be the book of creation. It says that with 32 wondrous parts, God has created the world, etc. And the 32 wondrous parts are supposed to be 10 Sephiroth and 22 alphabet, which they explain in the subsequent verses of that book, Sefer Yetzirah. But the idea is that it seems they were referring to the 32 times mentioned word Elohim in chapter 1 of Genesis. The point I'm making here is that the Bible, the Tanakh, begins with the name of Elohim alone throughout these sections until Genesis chapter 2 verse 3. That's the point. So what happens in chapter 2 verse 3? Let's see. That's the last time Elohim is mentioned. The word Elohim is mentioned by itself. Okay. Vayvarech Elohim et Yom HaShevi'i Vaikaddesh Oto. So God blessed the 7th day and He sanctified it, or He made it holy. Vaikaddesh. So that's the thing. Why is this important? Once the day was sanctified, we see Hashem is introduced in the next verse. Hashem is introduced with the compound name Hashem Elohim. Elle toledot hashamayim ve'haaretz behibbaram beyom asot Adonai Elohim eretz v'shamayim. So these are the generations of the heavens and the earth in their creation, in their creating. On the day Hashem made Asot Adonai, on the day of making of on their day of making When Hashem Elohim, he made earth and the heavens. Earth and heavens. Notice there is a hey missing here. There is no definite article, whereas there is a definite article here previously. Ele toledot hashamayim ve'ha'aretz behib baram. This refers to chapter 1 verse 1. These are the generations. And then when Hashem Elohim is mentioned, Eretz v'shamayim. So these are definite, meaning a particular heavens and a particular earth. As though there are some generations and a particular set of heaven and earth generations. But these are generic. Eretz v'shamayim, no particular one is mentioned when Hashem's name is written. Okay, this is the first time Hashem's name occurs in chapter 2 verse 4, and it occurs as a compound name, not by itself. Hashem Elohim, Adonai Elohim, YHWH Elohim. Now this phrase, the compound name, occurs 40 times in the entire Tanach. 40 times. And out of these 40 times, 20 times, the name, compound name occurs in Genesis chapter 2 and Genesis chapter 3 alone. And the first occurrence is in 2:4, and the last occurrences is in 3:23, and that's it. Again, this compound name doesn't appear in the book of Genesis at all. It's very, very interesting. Hashem, the name of Hashem appears in the next chapter, chapter 4. But Hashem Elohim, the compound name, doesn't appear after this last verse. So what is the significance? Why is Hashem Elohim compound name occurring throughout this chapter 2 and throughout the chapter 3? And what is the connection of that compound name to Eden is what we are going to look at. Okay? So let's look at the last verse here. So as I said, last verse in this section is 3:23. In 3:23 we read, YHWH Adonai Elohim migan Eden lavod et ha'adama asher lukach misham. And so Hashem Elohim sent him out, right? Whom sent him out? Who sent him? Hashem Elohim sent whom out? Adam, Ha'adam, the man. He's called the man, Ha'adam. Migan Eden, out of the Garden of Eden. So essentially what's happening here is, the last time it is mentioned, man was chucked out of the Garden of Eden. If you go to the first occurrence is in chapter 2 verse 4, but before chapter 2 verse 4, the previous verse is YHWH, Elohim sanctifies, made it holy. Holy is made it holy. And then once the day is made holy, we see Hashem Elohim enters the scene in the narrative. It's very, very interesting. These people have put it in a very deliberate manner. It is not random at all. This is a deliberate design. So the point I'm making is, in this section of chapter 2 and chapter 3, in all these verses, all the 20 times that we said it occurs in the book of Genesis, first time Hashem Elohim appeared, before the first time Hashem Elohim is introduced, a sanctification was made, YHWH. And then Hashem Elohim disappears once Adam was kicked out of the Garden of Eden. So it clearly shows that the compound name is connected with Eden. As long as man is in Eden, the compound name was used. Here, at least in Genesis. Okay? Now, and that is the really reason why, you see, without Kaddesh, without sanctification, Hashem's name was not introduced. And therefore, Hashem's name is holy. Who is like unto thee, O Hashem, among the gods? Who is like unto thee, glorious in holiness, fearful in praises, doing wonders? Glorious in holiness. Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tsevaot, Melo Kol Haaretz Kevodo. So the name of Hashem, YHWH, is intensely related to holiness. Holiness as he defines it. HaKadosh HaBaruch Hu is how the Jews call him. That's why they call him HaKadosh Baruch Hu, meaning the Holy One, blessed be he. Okay, now, the next chapter, that is after 3:23, after Genesis 3:23, when Adam and Eve were chucked out of the Garden of Eden, the next verse, that is, you flip the page, we read, Adam yada et Chava ishto, v'tahar teled et Cain, v'tomer kaniti ish et Hashem. So, once they were out of the Garden of Eden, Cain was born. But it appears Cain may have been conceived before they were kicked out. And therefore, Eve says, I'll tell you why I say that. And Eve says that I have acquired kaniti, a man, ish et Adonai, meaning with the help of Hashem, with Hashem. Of course, the man is involved here. Where Adam yada et Chava ishto, and the man knew his wife Hava, and she conceived. There is no doubt. But the man who is born, there is an element of, because God breathed into, Hashem breathed into Adam, into the breath of, into his nostrils, and the same breath has come into him. Obviously, this probably happened before they were kicked out, meaning not the birth, but the conception. And he was born outside, is what I think. Which is why she says, I have acquired a man with the help of Hashem, and he called him Cain. Cain means a possession. So she's really treasuring him. But then the next guy who is born, Abel, the word Hevel means vanity. That's exactly the same word used by the author of Ecclesiastes, Solomon. He says, Hevel. So all is vanity, vanity. And that's the word. So why does she use the word vanity? So there must have been some sort of a comparison she made between Abel and Cain was for her, at least he was a possession. He was a great possession. And if you notice the descendants of Cain, they were very creative, extremely creative. They built the cities. They had music. They invented, they got all the metals and all that stuff, right? So all the creative arts were done by the children of Cain. Now, obviously you need to trace this history, right? So what happened? Now this guy got, what about Seth and all that? We'll see. What about Seth? So what about Seth in verse 25? Interestingly, by the way, I said one thing that I forgot to mention, that the compound name is missing in chapter 4. You see, she says Hashem, but notice that Hashem Elohim is not there. So they are outside the garden. Cain is born outside the garden, and Hashem Elohim is not used. She says Hashem. And as though like they are now separated for him, and and I'll tell you why. Because in verse 25, Vayeda Adam od et ishto, and Adam knew again his wife, and we read Vatelet ben Vatikra, she bore a son, and she called et Shemo his name Shet, and he called her name. She called his name Shet. Ki Shet li Elohim zera acher tachat Hevel. So she is saying, God has given me an offspring in the place of Hevel. Who God? Elohim. She doesn't use the name Hashem she has used for Cain in verse 1. In this case, she says Elohim. Now, this is long after they were checked out of the garden. Again, we read, Vayeda Adam od, again, et ishto. And Adam again knew his wife, and she bore a son. And now in this case, she says, well, Elohim gave me the seed. So she is telling you some meaning as to the difference between Hashem and Elohim. Hey, by the way, here, hold on. These are not two different deities. It's the same one and the same God, but manifesting himself, these two names denoting different aspects of him. Okay, different aspects, which we will talk about shortly. Okay, so first is, but the name of Hashem, when it comes to talking about God with the name of Hashem, holiness is involved, and he is transcendent. We'll look at he's transcendent, but he comes into the world where Elohim is operating, right? Okay. And then the following verse, just after she says this, in the following verse, the last verse of chapter 4, we read, Ulshet gamhu yulad ben, vaikra et shemo Enosh. And for Seth also there was a son born, and he called his name Enosh. Here we read, Az huchal likro beshem Adonai. Meaning, from then, the calling upon the name of Hashem began. The calling upon the name of Hashem began from that time. Again, Hashem is only YHWH, not Hashem Elohim. You know, this guy, Sheth, he was given by Elohim to Hava, right? So now what are they doing? What are they lacking? They're lacking Hashem. Hashem, the side of Hashem. God's quality, as in God's revelation in relation to the name of Hashem. That's what they're lacking, and therefore they call upon Hashem. Okay, that's the really interesting part. So it is as though the name, the compound name, there was a breach, as it were, because these guys were kicked out of the garden. Once they are out of the garden, it appears as though there is a breach in the names, not in God, but in the experience of man with reference to God. That is, the way man sees God has changed. That's what I mean to say. The way man saw God while he was in the Garden of Eden was Hashem Elohim. Once he's out of the Garden of Eden, he's now seeing him as Elohim. He knows there is Hashem, right? So Hashem is inaccessible. They offer the sacrifice offering, and they call upon his name as though in order to obtain his favor and bring him down here to them, or like bring his presence in their lives. This is what the whole temple tabernacle is all about. Hashem coming onto the mountain at the giving of the Torah, and Hashem telling the Israelites to be very holy in their eating habits and in all those things. And, also in the camp, they have to keep the camp clean because Hashem goes around in the camp. So for Hashem to be present, you need holiness. And that is exactly what Elohim did. He sanctified the seventh day before Hashem's name is introduced in verse 4 in Genesis 2. Okay, so inaccessible and accessible. That's how we see. It's not completely inaccessible, but generally inaccessible, but accessible. All the nations of the world, they worship Elohim either in the singular or in their false conception as plural gods. God made, this is the same God, it is not two different gods, but God, the aspect of God with the name of Hashem is exclusively revealed to Israel and a few people, even Job, of course, non-Israelites, Job, Jethro, and also the guy in, the prophet Bilam. He also had access to Hashem by this name. There were some people, this name also occurs in the Indian Vedas, Rig Veda, as an epithet of one of their multiple Elohims called Agni and other guys. They use it as an adjective, which means it's we'll go into that at some other point of time. Probably they knew that name from the time of this 426. Az huchal likro beshem Adonai. Since then, you see, in these antediluvian times, people started calling upon the name of Hashem in order to receive his favor. Okay, calling upon. This was happening. The rabbis also say, so it's essentially the compound name then joined together is, as it were, the spiritual realm and the physical realm. Although I said heaven and earth, you could read it as spiritual and physical. So even the physical, visible heavens are physical. But we're talking about the invisible heavens and the visible earth and heaven, right? So the intersection of these two realms is probably what was Eden. Eden was physical, but then the spiritual dimension had interpenetrated the physical, and that was the situation in Eden where Ha-Adam, the man, was placed. And that narrative in chapter 2 is different from chapter 1. And the textual, the critical scholars are correct on that matter, and also a lot of rabbis do recognize that, and I think there is a significance for this difference. It doesn't mean there are two different creation narratives. There are two creation narratives, but they are not contradictory. They're complementary, and they're telling you two different sides of, may not be the same story, but then two different sides of the things which integrate and tell the whole story. Okay, there is a bigger story, which not everyone knows, not everyone understands. I don't claim to understand everything, but I do see some clues. Okay, so rabbis also see Hashem, with the attribute of mercy, and Elohim as being referring to the attribute of judgment. Okay, that's the explanation for the compound name. Now, the remaining parts, the remaining verses, the remaining occurrences of Hashem Elohim, right? I said it occurs 40 times, and the first 20 were there in Genesis chapter 2 and chapter 3. The remaining 20 occur first time in Exodus 9:30. In this case, God had already sent hail and hail mingled with fire. There we read about hail and fire mixed together. In between the hail, there was fire. So these two different, distinct, apparently, things that don't mix are mixed together and seen together in that miracle. And when Pharaoh refuses after he prayed and the Lord stops the hail and brimstone, hail and fire, and Pharaoh, obviously, he backs out, and Moses uses the name Hashem Elohim in his reply to Pharaoh in Exodus 9:30. Now, these green references, three of them, 2 Samuel 7, 1 Chronicles 17, these three are in the case of, these are in the context of Davidic covenant. That means God is making a special covenant, Davidic covenant, and that's why the compound name is used. It surely has a significance. And then these yellow ones, these 5 plus this one, 6 1, these are all about David telling Solomon to build the temple, and after that Solomon actually builds the temple and dedicates the temple to the Lord. All these instances are in that context, and therefore the Hashem Elohim is used, because there in connection with the temple, God's glory comes down, Hashem comes down and interpenetrates the realm below. Okay, so basically creation is, as it were, the realm of Elohim, the way he operates as Elohim within the nature, within the natural forces. Elohim operates. That's how he created in chapter 1. That's why in chapter 1 the name of Elohim exclusively is mentioned. Now, of course, in Psalms also we have these that are mentioned. And Jeremiah chapter 10 verse 10, we read Hashem Elohim Emet, meaning Hashem Elohim is the truth. And there is a contrast made with the other gods. And probably that's why it is used. And I don't know about Jonah, but I'm sure for every verse here, there is a significance why this compound name is used. So that brings us to the end of this video. Thank you for watching. Please do like the video, subscribe to my channel, click the bell icon. Also, please do comment below, and I will see you with another video as soon as I can. Thank you very much.